this armor of sort of masculinity that boys are taught in order to become men, sort of thing, becomes really, detrimental to themselves and other people in their lives.
Taylor, thank you so much for the time to chatting with me. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you.
This is an incredible film. Honestly, it is
Oh, thanks.
incredible. Look at Me is very special. Um, how did you know you were ready to tell your story? Or a
Oh, that's a great
fictionalized
question.
version? Maybe there's a blurred line here. I think it said there's fictionalized reality, I think it says.
Yeah, that's right. Like I call it a fictional autobiography, essentially, where it's like the emotional truths are all, quite real, or different events are parsed from different places in my life and then entirely changed to fit a narrative, essentially, right? But the first question you asked is really interesting because it's actually something that I asked myself a number of times before making it. I had done a stage play version of it, which was kind of like a solo show, where it's essentially just one to one talking to the audience. And in doing that, I was wondering about maybe adapting it because I adapted my first feature was also a play initially, and I think to tell a story that's that personal or maybe uh, you know that has elements that could sort of do damage if not handled properly for people who are either gone through anything just sort of themselves or have someone they love going through it. I think it was just time. You need time to like separate yourself from what you've gone through throughout your life, and so I spent time, of course, in therapy and thinking a lot about the effects of an eating disorder in my life and the people around me, and because I think that's what happens with something like this. And almost equate it to similar to an addiction in a way that someone is an addict, it does affect people and their around them who they love. And I think an eating disorder, depending on, in my experience at least, did that too. Yeah.
Well, what I really respect about this film, I think, is the opening. We've seen films before with a warning, flashing lights or could contain traumatic themes or whatnot. But this one actually says if you need to take a break, here's someone to talk to, which I think is really important to get that conversation started. But recognizing that this could be an active thing taking place in theater or on VO at home, I think is a really powerful thing. Why did you want to do that?
Oh, that's interesting, and it's great to hear that you resonated with that in a positive way because I've had a couple of people also resonate with like, oh, you don't need that. But the reason that I believe in it is that, like you said, these things could really trigger someone who's going through this experience or has a loved one who's going through it. And I wouldn't want them to feel like, oh, I'm just going to turn it off altogether. I almost feel like having that at the beginning says like, you're in our hands. There's going to be stuff in here that's as raw and honest as we can be. But by the end of it, like hopefully you're in decent enough hands that you come to a place of conclusion of this character moving towards this sort of unwitting journey of self-love. And so I almost wanted the audience to feel like they had permission to stop so that they could continue instead of just turning it off altogether and not getting to the place where, this character, hasn't healed, but begins the journey of healing. I didn't want them to stop before that because the whole point of the movie would be for nothing essentially. Right. So that's kind of why that's there is it gives people an opportunity to go, oh, I don't have to I don't have to finish this or I don't have to do this all in one sitting. I can take my time with it sort of thing. Yeah.
Excuse me. Um, there's such emotional honesty in this, and I think that's one of the lines. The best acting is living honestly.
Mhm.
And I was wondering, as you're working on this, I mean, like you said, it was a play first, but since this is a fictional autobiography, was there a bit of a disconnect between yourself and the character, or was it just as difficult to play because you go to some very difficult places in this film?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I think there is a separation that you create because, I mean, everyone's approach to acting is so different, and mine comes from maybe a place that includes both the integrity of like who you are and the character coming together, but also this like innate separation because it is fiction, even if the events are similar to your own life. And so, with the character in the film, even though I'm playing like a fictional version of myself, I wanted to take sort of like the sort of like insecurities or like the ugly truths or the shames that were sort of like deep down inside, and then actually bring them externally to the character too.
Mm.
So the character's a lot more socially awkward. Than maybe I am, or I believe I am in real life at least. And so I wanted to externalize those feelings that can feel very intense inside your body, and, and especially with something like anxiety, but that we don't really see on the surface that much, and sort of like filter that through the dialogue and how these characters interact or how people perceive him. And so uh, that was an interesting exercise. That was creating a character that was quite different from me in one way, even though it was like these emotional truths. I think when it gets to like heavier and harder scenes where you know you're admitting something that you have worked through in the writing and only realize in the writing, like I don't believe in art as therapy, but I do believe that we like find out things about how we perceive others or ourselves in the act of creating something. And those moments were always tough because you'd have realized it as you're writing it. Like there's a revelation at the end of the movie when he's sitting with a therapist, and the revelation of like, I don't want to stop doing this for these reasons. When I first wrote that, I was like, oh, like that's maybe the most brutally honest I could have thing I could have realized. And I didn't know it until I wrote it. Those moments are harder because you have to reconcile with the truth more so than the actual acting of it. I think it's in the writing when you like write something and you go, oh, I guess that is true for me. Okay, now I have to think about that and what that means for the audience. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And those scenes where you're tapping into what's going on inside his mind are are terrifying. Um, but they're terrifying because I feel like I've had those moments and I'm sitting there and I'm
Right.
like,
Yeah.
oh, I can relate to this, and it's sort of like he's out there and inside his head he's just screaming in his head, and I mean, I know we've come a long way in talking about mental health in the years, but there's still even just men talking about mental health though is still a seems like a difficult area to do, at least
Yeah.
in this space. And I was wondering your thoughts on that, and because there still seems to be this, or whether or not there still seems to be this stigma.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there is, and I think that's why we see an unfortunate like the statistics around suicide in men. I think that is directly tied to this sort of this issue that we have around vulnerability. And I think this sort of like this armor of sort of masculinity that boys are taught in order to become men, sort of thing, becomes really detrimental to themselves and other people in their lives. And so as much as I think things like being more vulnerable, and talking to someone or going to therapy, whatever that is, becoming more normalized, I think sometimes what happens, maybe a hot take here, is that like in those scenarios, um, men, because of this sort of stigma around it, will still not reveal the actual like deepest darkest truth that is there that could actually lead to healing, and instead are using the tools of therapy to like sort of surface level deal with things that they can like use with their mask, with people, and maybe that makes things better on like a moment to moment like everyday interaction sort of level. But um, I think it's really hard to face your most vulnerable self or your most insecure self or whatever that happens to be. Um, and I think, yeah, that's part of what I wanted to talk about in the film, or that's why I was also thinking like, okay, the most shameful things that I actually don't want people to ever watch, I should probably put those in the movie. Despite that sort of second version of yourself that's like, don't do that.
Yeah, what a conversation to have, right? It's like, well, I should probably bare my soul here. Uh, You know, is there any easier way to do it? You know, this sort of
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
but that's an interesting point you say there too, because I think that's what we see is, you know, a lot of times men like to release the pressure gauge a little bit rather than letting things out. It's like if I
Mhm.
let a little steam, then it'll just go down a little bit, but we're not dealing with the problems.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. It's just an incredible film. I honestly,
Oh, thanks.
it is. It's wonderful. Taylor, what do you hope people take away from Look at Me?
The intention with it is that, as we're kind of talking about, it's sharing the sort of most vulnerable aspects of dealing with an eating disorder or dealing with mental health. And ideally, it helps folks who are either going through that or, have someone they love going through that, feel a little bit less alone. It's like I always think that when people create something and you see it and you connect with it in a way that you're like, oh, me too, you feel a little less alone. Or maybe if you don't understand that experience and you're like, I can't ever understand how someone could be bulimic. I don't understand, like, how could you ever do that to yourself? Ideally, this movie can, for the people that do end up seeing it, give a bit of insight into like, oh, like, this is it's not just a crazy person. Like, this is people are dealing with and struggling with things, and it's sort of manifesting in this. And that, the root of the problem for an eating disorder isn't really the eating disorder. It's something underneath that. It's like some lack of self. It could be anything. It could be trauma. It could be a lack of self worth. It could be, you know, a variety of things. But that, like, compassion for that is important.
Absolutely, absolutely. I appreciate it. Honestly, Taylor, thank you so much for the time.
No,
Uh,
thank you.
absolutely. Taylor Olson, writer, director, and star of Look at Me. Have a great day, Taylor. Thanks so much.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.
Absolutely.